The faith that stood in fire, the story of Daniel. What would you do if one morning everything you believe in collapsed? If the city you loved burned to ashes and the God you worship seemed silent? Would you still believe when the whole world tells you it's over? This is the story of Daniel, a young man who lost everything, yet found something far greater, an unshakable faith that stood through fire, kings, and lions. The fall of Jerusalem. The story begins in a city once called the jewel of the earth, Jerusalem. Its walls glistened under the golden sun, and the Temple of Solomon stood like a crown of glory, a place where heaven and earth seemed to meet. But on that fateful year, around 605 BC, the unthinkable happened. The armies of Babylon, led by King Nebuchadnezzar, surrounded the city. Trumpets of war echoed across the hills. Flames rose from the temple. The streets once filled with children's laughter now ran red with tears. Among those captured were 4 young men, noble, educated, and faithful. Their names, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. They were taken hundreds of miles away, into the heart of the enemy's empire, Babylon, the city of gold, sin, and power. A world ruled by gods of stone, where men bowed to idols and truth was whatever the king declared. And in this strange land, Daniel would face the greatest question of all. How do you stay faithful when everything around you tells you bow down? A test at the king's table. Babylon was magnificent. Towering ziggurats touched the clouds, and the hanging gardens shimmered with colors the exiles had never seen. But beneath the beauty was a quiet danger, assimilation. The young captives were given new names, new clothes, and new gods. They were told to forget their past, to become one of Babylon's own. One evening, Daniel stood before a table covered with food and wine, the best in the empire. But he knew that these delicacies had been offered to idols. To eat them would mean to betray the God he still believed in. Everyone else gave in. After all, who would blame them? They were prisoners, far from home. But Daniel made a quiet decision in his heart, a decision that would change everything. I will not defile myself. Instead, he asked to eat only vegetables and drink water for 10 days, a simple act of obedience. When those 10 days passed, something miraculous happened. Daniel and his friends looked healthier, stronger, and brighter than all the others who ate the king's food. It was a small victory, but it marked the beginning of something great. God honored their faithfulness, giving them wisdom and understanding beyond measure. And for Daniel, an extraordinary gift, the ability to interpret dreams and visions. The forgotten dream. Not long after, Babylon trembled with fear. King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, one that disturbed his soul. But when he woke, he couldn't remember it. In his rage, the king demanded his magicians and wise men tell him both the dream and its meaning. If you cannot, he roared, you will all be executed. Panic spread through the palace. No one could possibly know another man's dream. And among those sentenced to death was Daniel. That night, Daniel did what he always did when faced with the impossible. He prayed. He gathered his 3 friends, and together they sought mercy from the God of heaven. In the quiet hours of night, God revealed the mystery. Daniel saw the dream exactly as the king had seen it. A colossal statue made of gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay, and then a stone cut without hands had struck the statue and shattered it to dust. When Daniel stood before the king, he said humbly, "No man can reveal this mystery, but there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets." He described the dream and explained its meaning, that each part of the statue represented kingdoms that would rise and fall, until at last the eternal kingdom of God would triumph forever. Nebuchadnezzar was astonished. He fell to his knees and declared, "Truly, your God is a God of gods and Lord of kings." And in that moment, Daniel, the slave boy from a fallen city, became the most trusted advisor in the empire, the fiery furnace. But power is a dangerous thing. It can humble a man or consume him. Sometime later, Nebuchadnezzar built a massive golden statue, towering over the plains of Dura. A royal decree went out. When you hear the sound of the music, you must fall down and worship the image. Whoever refuses will be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. The music played. Thousands bowed. Only 3 remained standing, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Furious, the king gave them one last chance. but they answered with words that would echo through eternity. The God we serve is able to deliver us, and he will deliver us. But even if he does not, we will not bow. The furnace roared, heated 7 times hotter than usual. The 3 men were thrown in. The soldiers who carried them died from the heat. But as the king looked into the flames, his eyes widened in disbelief. "Do we not throw 3 men bound into the fire?" he shouted. "But I see 4 walking freely unharmed, and the 4th looks like the Son of God." When they emerged, not a single hair was burned. They didn't even smell of smoke. Nebuchadnezzar fell to the ground and declared, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, for there is no other God who can save like this." Their faith had turned a furnace into a testimony, a story still told thousands of years later. The dream of the tree. Time passed. The mighty king had another dream of a vast tree reaching the heavens, providing shelter for every creature. But then a heavenly messenger appeared and commanded, "Cut down the tree." Daniel knew what it meant. The tree was Nebuchadnezzar himself, and unless he repented, he would lose his kingdom. A year later, pride took hold again. The king stood on his palace rooftop and said, "Is this not Babylon the Great, that I have built by my mighty power?" At that very moment, a voice thundered from heaven, "The kingdom has departed from you." Nebuchadnezzar lost his mind. He lived like an animal, eating grass, drenched by the dew, until he finally looked up to heaven and acknowledged the true king, the God of heaven. When his sanity returned, he declared, "All his works are truth, and his ways are justice. Those who walk in pride, he is able to humble." It was a confession of man broken and restored by the mercy of God, the handwriting on the wall. Years passed, and Babylon's glory began to fade. Nebuchadnezzar was gone. His grandson, Belshazzar, sat on the throne, proud, reckless, and defiant. One night, while enemy armies surrounded the city, Belshazzar held a great feast. In his arrogance, he ordered the sacred cups from Jerusalem's temple to be brought out, the very vessels once used in the worship of God. As the wine flowed and laughter filled the hall, a sudden silence fell. A mysterious hand appeared, floating in the air, and began writing on the palace wall. The king's face turned pale. His knees trembled. None of his wise men could read the words. Then Daniel, now an old man, was summoned once more. He read the inscription aloud, Mean Tekel Upharsin, and he explained, "God has numbered your days and brought them to an end. You've been weighed and found wanting. Your kingdom will be divided and given to the Medes and Persians." That very night, the prophecy came true. The city was invaded. Belshazzar was slain, and Babylon, once thought eternal, fell into the hands of another empire, the lion's den. Under the new rule of King Darius, Daniel once again rose to power. He was wise, honest, and faithful, and that made him enemies. Jealous officials plotted against him, convincing the king to pass a law. For 30 days, no one may pray to any god or man except the king. But Daniel's faith could not be silenced. 3 times a day, he opened his window toward Jerusalem, knelt and prayed, just as he always had. When his enemies caught him, they rushed to tell the king. Darius was heartbroken. He admired Daniel, but the law of the Medes and Persians could not be changed. That night, Daniel was thrown into a den of hungry lions. The stone was rolled over the entrance. The king returned to his palace, unable to eat or sleep. At dawn, he ran to the den and cried out, "Daniel, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you?" A voice answered from the darkness, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the lions' mouths. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight." Daniel was lifted out. Unharmed, his enemies were cast in, and the lions devoured them before they hit the ground. King Darius then proclaimed throughout the land, "The God of Daniel is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed." The legacy of faith. From a teenage captive to an old prophet, Daniel's life spanned empires and generations. He lived through the rise and fall of kings, yet his heart never changed. Through every trial, the table, the fire, the lions, one truth remained. Faith doesn't depend on circumstances. It stands firm even when the world burns. Daniel's story is not just history. It's a mirror reflecting the faith we're called to live today. Because every one of us will face our own Babylon. Moments when compromise looks easier than conviction, when fear whispers louder than truth. But just like Daniel, if we choose faith over fear, obedience over comfort, and humility over pride, then even in the fire, even in the darkness, we will find that we are never alone. The faith that stood in fire, body section. The story of Daniel is not just a record of ancient kings and dreams. It's a journey of faith that begins in captivity, but ends in glory. The king's table, faith in small things. When Daniel and his 3 friends were brought into the royal palace, they were treated differently from other captives. Nebuchadnezzar ordered that the brightest and strongest young men of Judah be trained to serve him. They were taught the language, the literature, and the customs of Babylon. It was all designed to make them forget who they were and who they belonged to. But the first real test of faith didn't come from war or persecution. It came from something as ordinary as a meal. The king's servants placed before them golden plates filled with delicacies, meat roasted in fine spices, wine aged for years. It looked delicious. But Daniel knew the truth. This food had been sacrificed to Babylon's idols. To eat, it would be to join in the worship of false gods. So Daniel made a decision. Quietly, firmly, he told the steward, "Please, test your servants for 10 days. Give us only vegetables and water." The steward hesitated, afraid of the king's wrath, but finally agreed. 10 days later, the results stunned everyone. Daniel and his friends looked healthier, stronger, and more radiant than any of the others who had eaten from the royal table. God was already honoring their obedience. It may seem small, just food, but faithfulness in small things prepares us for faith in greater things. Because when the furnace comes and the lions roar, only those who have walked faithfully in the quiet moments will stand firm in the fire. The forgotten dream. Years passed. Daniel's wisdom and humility became known throughout Babylon. Then one night, King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream that terrified him. He called for all his magicians and wise men. But this time, the king refused to tell them what the dream was. "Tell me both the dream and its interpretation," he demanded, "or I will have you all executed." No one could do it. No man could possibly know another man's dream. And when word reached Daniel that the king had ordered all the wise men killed, he asked for time. Then he gathered his 3 friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and together they did what they had always done. They prayed. They prayed not for power or safety, but for mercy, that God would reveal what man could not see. That night, as Daniel slept, the mystery was revealed. He saw the same vision the king had seen, a great statue, dazzling in brightness. Its head was made of gold, its chest of silver, its belly of bronze, its legs of iron, and its feet a mixture of iron and clay. Then a stone, cut not by human hands, struck the statue and shattered it to dust. The wind carried the pieces away, and the stone grew into a great mountain that filled the whole earth. When Daniel stood before the king, he spoke not as a prophet seeking glory, but as a servant of God. No wise man, enchanter, or magician can explain this mystery to the king. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets. He told Nebuchadnezzar that the statue represented the kingdoms of the world, powerful, proud, but temporary. And the stone that destroyed them all was a kingdom of God, a kingdom that would never end. The king fell to his knees in awe. Truly, your God is a God of gods and Lord of kings. Daniel was promoted to the highest position in Babylon, but power did not change him. He knew the glory belonged not to him, but to the God who had spoken through him. The fiery furnace, faith that refuses to bow. Time passed, and the king forgot the lesson he had learned. He built a golden statue, nearly 30 meters high, and commanded the entire empire to bow down when the music played. Everyone obeyed. Everyone except 3 men. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to bow. Their loyalty belonged to only one king. When Nebuchadnezzar heard of it, his fury burned like the furnace itself. He gave them one final chance. Bow down, or you'll be thrown into the fire. And what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Their answer was calm but unshakable. "O king, the God we serve is able to deliver us from the fiery furnace. But even if he does not, we will not bow." They were bound and thrown into flames. The fire was so hot that the soldiers who threw them in were killed instantly. But as the king looked into the furnace, he saw something that froze him in place. "Did we not cast 3 men bound into fire? But I see 4 men walking freely, unharmed, and the 4th looks like the Son of God." When they stepped out, not a single hair was burned. They didn't even smell of smoke. That day, the most powerful king on earth declared, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. There is no other God who can save in this way." Sometimes God delivers us from the fire. Other times, he delivers us through the fire. But in every case, he is there, walking in the flames with us. The dream of the great tree. Nebuchadnezzar ruled for years in pride and splendor, but God had one more message for him. The king dreamed of a magnificent tree that reached the heavens, a tree so vast that every creature found shelter in its branches. But suddenly, a heavenly messenger descended and cried out, "Cut down the tree and leave only the stump." When Daniel heard the dream, his face grew pale. He knew what it meant. The king would lose everything, his power, his sanity, his throne, until he learned that heaven rules over all. A year later, pride spoke again. Nebuchadnezzar stood on his rooftop and said, "Is this not Babylon the Great, which I have built by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" Before the words had left his lips, a voice thundered from heaven, "The kingdom has departed from you." The king was driven away from men. He lived like an animal, eating grass, drenched by the dew, until he lifted his eyes to heaven and acknowledged the Most High God. When his reason returned, so did his kingdom, and with it came humility. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and honor the King of heaven, for all his works are true and his ways are just. Those who walk in pride, he is able to humble. Even kings must learn that greatness without gratitude is just another form of madness. The writing on the wall. Decades passed. Babylon's glory began to fade. Nebuchadnezzar was gone, and a new king sat on the throne, Belshazzar, his arrogant descendant. One night, as enemy armies surrounded the city, Belshazzar threw a lavish feast. Gold lamps glowed, music echoed, and the air was thick with wine and pride. In his drunkenness, he ordered the sacred vessels taken from the temple of Jerusalem, the ones once used to worship God, to be filled with wine for his guests. They toasted their idols. They mocked heaven. And then silence. A mysterious hand appeared and began to write glowing words on the palace wall. The king froze. His color drained. His knees shook. None of his magicians could read it, until Daniel, now an old man, was brought before him. He looked upon the writing and said, Min tekel upharsin." Then he explained, "God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. You've been weighed in the balance and found wanting. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians." That very night, the prophecy came true. The river gates were breached, the army entered, and Babylon fell. The candle of the greatest empire on earth was snuffed out in a single night. The lion's den. A new empire rose, the kingdom of the Medes and Persians. And through every change, Daniel remained faithful. King Darius saw Daniel's wisdom and placed him in charge over the whole realm. But jealousy is a powerful poison. The other officials plotted against him, but they could find no fault, except in his devotion to God. So they devised a trap. They convinced the king to issue a decree. For 30 days, no one may pray to any god or man except the king. The law could not be changed, and Daniel knew it. Yet when he returned home, he did not hide. He opened his windows toward Jerusalem, knelt down and prayed, just as he always had. The conspirators rushed to the king and demanded that Daniel be punished. Darius tried to save him, but the law was sealed. That night, Daniel was thrown into the lion's den. A great stone was rolled across the entrance, and the king sealed it with his own signet. All night long, Darius could not eat or sleep. At dawn, he ran to the den and cried out, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you?" And from the darkness came a calm, steady voice, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. Daniel was lifted out, unharmed. His enemies were thrown in, and the lions devoured them instantly. Then King Darius made a decree for the whole world to hear. The God of Daniel is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall have no end. Daniel's faith had turned empires upside down, not by force, but by faithfulness. Faith beyond empires. Decade after decade, Daniel served under kings and kingdoms that rose and fell like waves on the sea. But his loyalty never shifted. His home was not Babylon or Persia. It was the kingdom of God. He had seen fire turn into freedom, lions turn into peace, and pride turn into humility. And through it all, one truth remained. God's power is not limited by nations. His plans are not delayed by kings. His faithfulness never fades. The God who was with Daniel in the fire is the same God who stands with us in our trials today.